Hello, good evening, welcome. My name is Ben, and how are you? Are you alright? Yeah, I'm alright. As you can see, things are a bit different. There's going to be a few changes around here. Yeah, I have moved. I have moved to deepest, darkest Devon, and I do not have a white wall for me to keep up with the rustic aesthetic of the village, but I do have well, the rest of my videos. But I do have a bookcase for me to film up against. So now I can look like a proper booktuber and be all very like, oh. So yes, here we are. It's the end of September, and I'm going to talk about the books that I read in September. How many books did I read? I read seven. Seven. I read 7 books. All well, 6 novels and 1 novella. So I guess we should just get on with it. Right. So the first book that I read was The Painted Veil by W. Somerset Maugham. This is not the first Somerset Maugham book that I've read this year. Earlier this year, I think in the spring, I read The Razor's Edge. So I read that, and I quite liked that. I quite liked The Razor's Edge. There's something sort of peculiar and sort of odd and maybe a little bit quirky about it. And I liked the writing as well, and I liked sort of his writing. So I thought, well, if I come across another Somerset Maugham book, then I'll give it a go. And so that's what happened. I was in a second-hand bookshop and I came across The Painted Veil. The Painted Veil. I don't know what this cover is about. What is this cover about? I don't know what any of these bits and pieces are. But there we go. If you're interested, there's bookmark. If you're interested, then the sort of the latest editions that are out are much more aesthetically pleasing. So, but yeah, that's by the by. So, The Painted Veil. The Painted Veil. The Painted Veil. So I have to say that I wasn't too keen on this, unfortunately. It starts out as quite a sort of campy romance thriller, and I was like, oh, fabulous. So the story centres around Kitty, who is living in Hong Kong with her husband, and she is having an affair, a sordid affair, with this guy called Charles, who's very sort of broad-backed, and I'm Charles. He's sort of one of those. And he's also married, and they're having this affair. And right at the beginning of the book, they're sort of Kitty's husband discovers the affair, and Kitty is like, well, doesn't really matter because me and Charles, we love each other, and so we'll just get divorced, and that's fine. And Walter, her husband, is a bacteriologist, and he's sort of like, hello. And she sort of thinks like, well, he's sort of like a meek man. He won't sort of mind getting a divorce, you know. However, Walter is much more angry about it, and so he gives Kitty an ultimatum. He's like, right, so I will grant you a divorce, but only if Charles also gets a divorce from his wife, and you two get married within a week of him divorcing. And Kitty's like, okay. And then he says, if that doesn't happen, then I'm also a doctor, and I'm going to this remote city in China, this remote town in China, where there is a cholera outbreak, and I'm going to help people over there in this cholera outbreak, and you're going to come with me. And effectively, you're going to go and get cholera with me. And she's like, well, that's fine, because Charles is going to agree to divorce his wife, and we're going to live happily ever after. So, bye! Of course, she goes to Charles and sort of says, let's get divorces. And of course, Charles is like, I never promised anything. I actually love my wife. And so Kitty's like, I've got to go and get cholera. So yes, so they go to this remote town where there is this cholera outbreak, and yeah, the rest of the book kind of becomes more of a morality tale. So Kitty kind of realizes what she's done, and she ends up helping out with these nuns, these missionary nuns in a convent, and the nuns are also helping out with the outbreak, but they're helping they're sort of bringing up the orphans of the people who have died. And so Kitty, she sort of she works with these nuns, and she sort of realizes that they have something that she doesn't, a sort of a purpose in life, or something that she doesn't have. Not necessarily a religious thing, but she she's like, what do they have? I want it. My life has no purpose. Ah. One of the sort of the big things about the book is that Kitty realizes she has great compassion for Walter, and she realizes that the only way that he's going to be happy and sort of move on is if he forgives her and kind of lets her go, kind of thing. But it's a bit of a tall order to sort of go to someone who you've done wrong by and say, well, you'll feel much better if you forgive me. So you can't really do that. So Kitty, she's sort of in this weird sort of place. Yeah, there's some interesting stuff in that. I didn't really... There was a few things that I wasn't so keen on. So first of all, we'll get it out of the way. I mean, this is a problematic novel. Yeah, it's a British novel published in the 20s. It's set in Hong Kong and China, and it's centered around white people, and you can sort of just join the dots as to what the kind of the problems are. So you kind of get what you get what you're given, sort of thing. And there were a few bits where I was like, ugh. Is this the character or is this the author? W. Somerset Maugham. But yeah, you can't expect a novel like this to have a modern lens on this sort of stuff. So there was that, and then also, I read somewhere that someone said, "Oh, W. Somerset Maugham, he knows how to write women," and I'm like, does he? Because Kitty in this book, I mean, she as a character, I found her a bit. It's it's quite melodramatic, some of the things, and she always has tears in her eyes, and she's always a bit kind of like, she's always a bit like that, and so I was like, so I got a bit tired of her towards the end. There is some very interesting. I mean, W. Somerset Maugham, he does, from reading the Razor's Edge, he is a good writer, and he is, and when he wants to be witty, he is, and all the rest of it. So I'm very close to you, aren't I? I just didn't really like the characterization of Kitty, and also the problematic stuff about it. So, but people do love this book. I mean, I was very interested to see what people thought of it, and I didn't realise it had been made into a film in the noughties with Naomi Watts. But people do really love this book, and I think people really respond to the kind of ethical, philosophical stuff about the novel, which is interesting. For me, I just couldn't get over the stuff about it, and I wasn't really a fan of Kitty as a character and the way she was written. So it's not for me, this book. Also, this book, unfortunately, it smells a bit. Yeah, I don't know what it is about it. It just smells. You know, it's very, very old. It's quite a pristine condition, but it's just a very, very old book. So it's like you have to sort of read it like this, you know. But yeah, interesting, but not for me, unfortunately. Next up, we have a bit of a brick. We have David Copperfield. He's got my hair, actually, hasn't he? I feel like I need to sort of just explain my journey with Dickens. I feel like I'm starting again with Dickens. I have read him sort of before in my life, like way, way, way before. You know, when I was at secondary school and stuff. Last year I read Great Expectations. Can you see it? It's one of these books here. I read Great Expectations, and I really liked that book. And I felt like it had been over a year since I'd read a Dickens, so I was like, right, it's time for a Dickens. And maybe because if the film had been out or something, but I chose David Copperfield. Now, this is a 900-page whopper. There's a bit of discrepancy on the internet about whether this is the longest novel, but I think this is the longest one. So David Copperfield, it's a rags to riches coming of age story about David Copperfield when he's a child up to... The main bulk of the book is up to when he's, I think, in late 20s, I think. So from the off, I forgot that Dickens... I don't know why I forgot this, but I forgot that Dickens really likes his terrible childhoods for his characters. And David Copperfield is pretty up there in terms of terrible ones. So his father has died. His mother, when he's around 9 or 10... remarries to Mr. Murdstone, who is this really, really nasty, sinister guy. And his sister, Miss Murdstone, moves in. And they have this thing where they like to completely emotionally and mentally eviscerate Mr. Murdstone's spouses. So David Copperfield's mother just completely becomes a shell of herself, and they treat David Copperfield, like dirt, and it's very, very nasty. Eventually he gets sent to this very, very nasty, again, strict school. But there he meets a couple of other boys who he sort of becomes a little bit, not obsessed with, but he makes friends there, sort of lifelong friends there. He leaves the school for reasons, and he is sent to I think some sort of workhouse, and things are just really, really dire. And eventually he runs away, and he runs away to Aunt Betsy. So Aunt Betsy is just, I mean, she's an icon, she's a legend, and she is the moment. I mean, come on now. Yeah, she's this sort of distant relation, and she sort of encapsulates a certain archetype of character which I really, really love. And that is of the older woman who is a little bit scary, a bit eccentric, very, very strict. You don't want to sort of cross her in any way, but she is inherently good. So, yeah, you sort of want her on your side, sort of thing. And Aunt Betsy, the donkeys, Janet! She is one of those. And so when the Murdstones realise that David Copperfield is sort of with her, they march along up to the house, and they have this very, very scary meeting with her. And they're like, we're taking David Copperfield back with us. And Aunt Betsy is like, no, you're not! Let me see you ride a donkey over my green again, and as sure as you have a head upon your shoulders, I'll knock your bonnet off and tread upon it. Yeah, so she's just fabulous, and I love, and she kind of, in the end, she kind of, she helps David Copperfield and everything. And so, yes, and then from there, it kind of becomes David Copperfield moving on up in life. The first sentence is, whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, these pages must show, basically. And that's the thing about this book, is that after sort of all the childhood stuff, David Copperfield, he kind of becomes this observer, basically, and sort of not really a passive thing, but basically you have David Copperfield sort of moving on up in life, and then you have lots of kind of subplots which are much more kind of exciting, which are happening to other characters, and he sort of observes these other sort of dramatic things that are happening to other people. So there's one character who she ends up eloping with someone, and then she disappears. So there's a whole sort of thing about trying to find where she is. There's a really, really fabulous nasty character called Uriah Heep. Uriah Heep. One of the things, I mean, Dickens is great at describing characters, isn't he? And Uriah Heep, I think at one point he's described as an eel. He's like, I am Amber, sir. And then there's just loads of characters. There's is it Barkis? Barkis is willing. I'm gonna use that as on a Tinder profile, I think. Ben is willing, and see how that works out. The only character that I really could not abide with was Dora, unfortunately. Sorry, Dora. I mean, she is just this. Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether I can't decide whether Dora is meant to be really annoying, or whether we're meant to be kind of, or whether we're meant to kind of feel sorry for her or something, because she's just the most. She suffers a bereavement, and then because when we meet her, she's sort of strong-willed, but then she sort of just disintegrates into kind of this really immature, dependent. Oh, I'm a child wife, and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, oh, for flip's sake, Dora. And even because I was wondering about that, because even Aunt Betsy, she puts up with her, and I'm like, I would have thought that Aunt Betsy would be like, pull yourself together. But other than that, no, I did enjoy it in the end. It does sort of meander along. It's not necessarily a slow burner, but it kind of meanders along, and there's sort of interesting, exciting bits that happen along the way. David Copperfield himself as a character, for a lot of the time, he does become a sort of observer of other things, and when things happen to him, it's a very, very dramatic thing that happens near the end. But yeah, no, I was interested in it, and I did like it. As I say, I wasn't sort of gripped all the way through, but by the end I was like, oh, right, okay, that's what David Copperfield is about. That's really good. So yeah, so I would recommend it if you have the time. But yeah, I think I prefer Great Expectations for now. But I mean, I did enjoy it. So yes, David Copperfield. And as I say, Aunt Betsy is going to be one of my favourite characters. The donkeys, Janet! Right, next up, I read, as a lot of you may know, or may not, I'm very, very interested in novels in the second person. I'm just very, very interested in that form of writing and how authors kind of handle it. So if you type in novels in the second person into Google, then you get like a kind of a weird, just spat at you, you get a weird mix of novels. But there are a few that sort of crop up, more than once, And one of them is Maps by Nurrudin Farah. This is so Nurrudin Farah. He is a Somali writer, and this is set in Somalia. And I was interested in this just because a lot of the novels, that are recommended, they are sort of European or American based. So you don't really get any kind of world fiction, like this. So this, I don't think this is in print anymore. I got this this is a secondhand book from Abe Books, if you're interested. It wasn't too difficult to get at all. But yeah, I'm really surprised that this, I don't think that this is in print anymore, and I'm really surprised because it is really, 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 really good. So this is set, I didn't really know anything about this before I read it, but this is set, I think kind of is it set in the 70s, 80s? It's set within a war between Somalia and Ethiopia. And the main character, Asker, he's born in the Ogaden region, which is a Somali speaking part of Ethiopia. And there's this whole thing where the Somalis wanted to kind of unite all the Somali-speaking areas of that part of Eastern Africa. But Ethiopia wanted to hang on to the Ogaden region. So there was a kind of a war that happened between Somalia and Ethiopia. And Somalia sort of did start to win. However, the Russians decided to help Ethiopia. And so because of all the combined forces, Ethiopia eventually won. And so that's kind of like the backdrop of this novel. So Asker is born in the Ogaden region. His mother dies through complications in childbirth, and then an Ethiopian woman kind of takes on Asker. I think his name is Misra. Yeah, Misra. So she kind of brings Asker up more or less as her own child, although Asker is always aware that Misra isn't his own mother. However, they have this very kind of intense relationship. So when Asker grows up, the war is kind of so much that a lot of women and kids sort of flee to Somalia, and Asker has an aunt and uncle who are kind of, from what I sort of gathered, they're much more sort of middle class, and they're university lecturers, and they live in this nice house in a big city in Somalia. So he's sent there when he's more of an adolescent. And the book is about identity and nationality. So Misra is accused of betraying her village. She's accused of having told some Ethiopian soldiers about where a bunch of people are, and as a result of that, hundreds and hundreds of people were killed, and she's kind of blamed for it. And so she has to sort of flee the area herself. So he has this very, very interesting dilemma in that the mother figure who brought him up is potentially, betrayed his own people, potentially. And also he's had to kind of displace himself from his motherland. And he has to sort of work out what he wants to do. Does he want to go and fight, or does he want to go and study and stuff? And it's just I'm not really explaining it very well, but it's a really, really fascinating and really well-written book. People describe this as a lyrical novel, and that is what it is. It's really, really well done. Also, it has a very interesting... So I said that this was in the second person. That's not entirely true. It's told in the first, second, and third person. And each of the chapters, it kind of... there's a sort of like a rotating thing where one chapter is in the first, one chapter is in the second, and it kind of rotates, you know. And so what you have then is that you have this interesting thing where you're being presented with the character of Asger in a variety of different ways. So from his own perspective, you're being told about him from the third person, and you're being told as him, as it were. I'm really surprised it's not printed in print anymore. I think this is just because I really thought it was fabulous, and I left when I finished it. I was like, ooh. So yeah, it's going to stay with me, this novel. It's still, I would urge you, if you can, to read this book. It's not that too difficult to get a hold of. So yes, very much recommend. And then another second-person novella that I read, this is another one that's sort of recommended, is Earth and Ashes. This is by Atiq Rahimi. So this is just, it's 55 pages, but it's just like a real kicker. So this is set in Afghanistan, and it's set again within sort of war-torn settings. So there's a war between Russia and Afghanistan, and this is a really, really hard-hitting novel about this older man who is trying to make his way to find his son, who is working in this mine, remote mine, and he's on his way to find him because there's been an air bombing at his village, and you know, everyone in his family pretty much has been killed. So yeah, this older man has this terrible job of having to find his son and tell him that all of his family, bar his grandson, have died. And so the first part of the book, they're waiting on this older man and his grandson, who's become deaf because of the bombing. They're waiting for a car to kind of hitchhike to this remote mine, and he's trying to, or you are trying to work out how on earth you're going to say this terrible thing to his son. And on the way, he's sort of relying on the kindness of strangers and things. And when he reaches the mine, it's just this really amazing, powerful thing about the corrupt nature of some people, and yeah, it's just the ending is just really, really powerful and quite emotional, and yeah, it's another one that I would recommend if you're interested in the second person, and you just want a short, snappy story. Then I don't really read a lot of short stories and things, but this is a really, really good example of a very, very good, effective one. So yeah, I would thoroughly recommend this. So next up, one that we've all been waiting for. It is The Little Friend by Donna Tartt. So last month I read The Secret History, and that was kind of in prep for reading this again. So yeah, I haven't read this in over a decade, and in my head I was thinking this was like my least favourite Donna Tartt novel, but I was interested in rereading it again. Now, first of all, I don't know, I had got it into my head that I really disliked this edition. I mean, obviously you got the very horrific cover, which I don't know why they chose this. I don't know why they chose this. I was reading through, you know, waiting for a doll reference, and there was one paragraph where a doll sort of like this is mentioned, but it's not like integral to the plot or anything, and it's just, yeah, really, really weird choice. Also, I got it in my head that I didn't like this edition just because the text is really, really small. It's just, yeah, so I quite like to know that I'm sort of working my way through a novel, and so if the text is really, really small, then obviously that makes the reading process seem a lot slower. So there are two editions. If you wanted to buy this new, there are two editions. There's one which looks like The Secret History, and then there is another one. It has a water tower on the front, and the text is a lot bigger. That does make it a 700-page novel, whereas this is 550, I think. So I was thinking I was going to get that. However, I started to read this one, and I actually didn't mind. I think the story kind of hooked me in enough for me to not mind, so I just read from this one. Right, so this is about Harriet, who is 12 years old. She's living in a small Mississippi town, and her older brother, 12 years previous, when she was just a little baby, was murdered in quite a horrific way, or at least he has quite a horrific death, and it's sort of assumed that he was murdered. That opening, there's a prologue which sort of details that, and that is so kind of like, it's just amazing, that prologue. It's almost kind of very filmic, I think. But yeah, so 12 years later, Harriet is 12, and the case is never solved, and she gets it into her head that she is going to solve the murder. And she also gets it into her head that she knows who has done it. She thinks that this guy called Danny Ratcliffe did it. And him and his family are kind of this very, very scary bunch of criminals. They're always sort of in and out of prison, and they're just, yeah, they're very, very, you don't want to mess with them. And so she gets into her head that Danny Ratcliffe is the one that killed her brother, and so she's going to seek revenge. So this is a slow burner. It takes its flipping time in describing stuff. Donna Tartt, in this novel, she likes to set up a scene, and she will take a lot of time to describe a place, to describe a character. If you're in a new room, say, there will be a lot of description about what that room is like. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a sensory novel, it's just a very descriptive one. So you have a very, very clear idea of where you are, about the people, about the family. So Harriet, she has these 4 kind of great aunts, who, she has 4 great aunts, and her mother and her sister. And of course, the death of Robin, the brother, has cast this long shadow, sort of mournful shadow over the whole family. So yeah, it is a slow burner. There are a lot of exciting set pieces, though, in it. I'd forgotten a lot of the things. I'd sort of kind of remembered what happened at the end, kind of. But there's a lot of exciting, as I say, set pieces and kind of thrilling. It's almost like a thriller. So Harriet and her best friend Healy, who's 11, they kind of go on this sort of quest to seek revenge and stuff, and it's these 2 kids who are way over their heads in what they're dealing, in who they're dealing with. And there's just these terrifying moments, and kind of like, the narrator, it's not melancholic in tone, but it does have this sort of wry sense of foreboding, is how I would describe it. It's like, something bad's gonna happen. The central thing about Harriet getting revenge, you either sort of go with it or you don't. I mean, it is a bit extreme, but then, you either go with it or you don't. The climactic end of this is just so, like, again, it's very, very filmic, and it's kind of ridiculous, but it's so tense, and yeah. And the end, I was just really kind of I thought the end was so kind of powerful, looking back, like Harriet sort of realizing what she's done, and whether she, yeah, it's just really, I was like, oh, this is fabulous. So yeah, it does take its time. You do have to sort of sit with it and sort of be ready to, because I think Donna Tartt, she really wants you to sort of be in this environment with these characters. She wants you to know the backstory of everything. So you have this very, very clear image of where you are and of the people. But it is fabulous. I mean, I would definitely recommend it. It's interesting with The Little Friend because you've got The Secret History, which is the fan favourite, as it were, sort of like the cult classic fan favourite. And then you have The Goldfinch, which is like the critic's darling, which won the Pulitzer and everything. And then you have The Little Friend in the middle, and it's this kind of really sort of odd novel that sort of that is lesser known and people sort of overlook a lot of the time. But it's definitely worth reading if you can sit through the sort of the long setup of it all, and sort of just immerse yourself in it all. Then it is a worthwhile story, and I sort of forgot how much of a downer it is. There's about sort of over halfway you sort of realise after certain things happen, you're like, it sort of says like things would never be the same. It's like, oh god. So yeah, it is a bit of a downer. Maybe even more so than The Secret History. But But yeah, it's very, very exciting and just fabulous. Is it my favourite? Well, I don't know. I didn't. Sorry, Kieran. I did say I wasn't going to read The Goldfinch this year, but I think I will now. I think I will. Where is it? There it is. Yeah, I think I will read The Goldfinch. Maybe in. I'm going to give myself a break. I'll maybe read it in December or something, and then I'll have a much sort of clearer idea of where this novel stands. I think I like his Secret History over this one. I think it's a really different novel. It's really, really different. I mean, famously, she takes 10 years to write a novel, and so obviously this is sort of 10 years of work after The Secret History. So yeah, it's a very, very different novel to The Secret History, but it's I think it's very, very worthwhile. Also, head over to KD Books and JQ Reads because I think they're doing a read along of this, and they're always fabulous. So yes, Little Friend by Donna Tartt. I don't think it's my favourite. Sorry, Kieran, but it's definitely. I'm definitely glad that I reread it because it is really, really fabulous. So yes, and I don't mind this. I don't mind this edition anymore. I mean, this is when I think of The Little Friend. This is what I think of this cover, even though it's just a ridiculous cover. It's not really commuter friendly either. You don't really want to be on a train or a bus and be reading this. So yeah, but it is fabulous. So do read it. Right. So next up, I read We Need New Names by NoViolet Bulawayo. So obviously the book shortlist has been released, and one of them is This Mournable.
Take 2.
So the book of shortlist has been released, and one of the books on the shortlist is This Mournable.
Oh, get it right.
This Mournable Body, which I was interested by, again, because it's a novel in the second person. However, from what I've read and from what I've seen people say, it is not a standalone novel. It is the third of a trilogy, and I just don't have the time or patience to read through a trilogy at the moment. Anyway, so yeah, I was like, oh well, I'll sort of give that a miss. However, I think I heard Sean, the book Maniac, recommend this novel, which is another Zimbabwean novel, but it's a standalone novel. And interesting enough, it was shortlisted for the Man Booker in 2013. So there we go. And yeah, so from what he said, I was just sort of quite interested in it, so I picked it up. So this is set in a shantytown. Well, the first half of it is set in a shantytown in Zimbabwe, and it's first person from Darling, who is this young, I think she's meant to be like 9 maybe, this 9-year-old child. And when I started to read this, I suddenly realised that I don't know if I'm in the right frame of mind to read a novel like this, because it's basically the very, very hard, brutal life in this shantytown, told through the eyes of children who are kind of, running wild and kind of going off and, doing all these crazy things, whilst having a backdrop of this terrible government treating these people awfully. So yeah, I wasn't sure whether I was ready for it. However, I'm glad I stuck with it because it is a very, very good book. It's a debut novel as well, which is amazing. So it's centered around Darling, and the first half of the book is her in this shantytown in Zimbabwe, and the government have they've destroyed, bulldozed through, whole kind of neighborhoods, and so you have hundreds and thousands of people being displaced and having to make do in these shanty towns. And that's kind of what's happened to her and her family. So yeah, the first half of the novel is Darling and these kids sort of witnessing these sort of terrible events. There's a really, really scary chapter in which they witness a sort of a wealthy white couple in this very sort of well-to-do house. They sort of see this massive gang destroy their house and then sort of lead them away, and you're like, you don't really want to know what's going to happen to those two people. So yeah, each chapter kind of has a different event or a different scenario that these kids are either witnessing or sort of party to. And in that sense, it's quite the book is quite sort of episodic. But about halfway through the book, Darling is sent over to the States to live with her aunt in Detroit, Michigan, or Destroyed Michigan, as they say. Again, it's about identity as a Zimbabwean living in America, trying to sort of assimilate herself, adopt the accent, and sort of just trying to assimilate herself as more of an American rather than a Zimbabwean. While still having sort of deep love for her country, she sort of has deep sort of yearnings to go back, while still she realizes that to go back would mean, you're going back to this terrible existence. I think it's slightly, I don't know whether it's autofiction or not, but the author, she did move from Zimbabwe to America, to the States, to Detroit when she was 18, I think. So I don't know how much of this is kind of autofiction or not, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's a very, very powerful book. I wasn't kind of as, I guess, gripped, or I didn't really sort of enjoy it as much as other people seem to have done, but I can really appreciate that it is a very, very powerful novel. It's really, really well written. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe just the episodic nature of the book I wasn't a big fan of, but it's still very, very worth reading. It's well worth reading, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I would recommend it. Then last of all, I read this just in a day. I read Lie With Me by Philippe Besson. This is translated by Molly Ringwald. And this was fabulous. This was really, really fabulous. I think I heard Simon Savage recommend this author, or another book by this author. And I saw this in the shop and I was like, ooh, let's read something sordid and gay. So yeah, and that's not what the book is at all. So basically, this is it's kind of similar to The Razor's Edge, in that Philippe Besson, he is the protagonist, he is the main character in this book. And it's sort of, the lines between whether this is a memoir, whether this is autofiction, whether this is just completely made up, are really, really quite blurry. So yeah, it starts out in the 80s when the protagonist is 17, and he starts this relationship with Thomas, and they don't want to come out or anything, so it's a very sort of secret relationship, and it's quite sort of intense, and yeah, he sort of, the protagonist realizes that he is actually really, really in love with this guy. It is a well trodden story. It's the gay love tragedy, but there is something about it. I don't know what it is about this, because it deals with shame and deals with kind of regrets and all the rest of it, but there's something about it which does seem so personal. So yeah, that early bit where they're 17, I did kind of think back to when I was 17 and kind of all the escapades and the relationships that I entered. It just really, really took me back, even though this is set in the 80s. It took me back to when I was 17, and that kind of, all that kind of that you have when you're 17 as a gay man. So yeah, then there's another bit where it's 2006, and then another bit where it's 2019, I believe. So there's a bit where a son of Thomas kind of shows up later on in life, and I was a bit worried that we were going to get into Kevin Elliott territory, and it was going to be all sort of exploitative and stuff, and sort of wish fulfillment and stuff. However, that you don't have to worry about that. It is really, really heartbreaking. The end, I think I've cried 3 times now from books this year, so it doesn't often happen. But yeah, at the ending of this, I was like, oh no! It's just really, really heartbreaking, and it's just fabulous. I really, really liked it. Yeah, it was interesting when I put on Instagram that I was reading this, and I had a lot of a lot of my gay friends saying like, "I love this book," and you can sort of see why. I mean, it kind of just details. I really recognised a lot of the feelings and emotions and a lot of the scenarios that this character kind of goes through. And yeah, it is sort of fascinating because it does have this sort of very greyish. Is this a memoir? Is this complete fiction? I don't know, but it's just, I really, really loved it. It's beautifully written, really, really well translated. Really well translated. But yeah, I definitely recommend this. This is really up there in terms of my favourite books this year. I do need something. A lot of these books have been a bit downers, so I do need to read something soon that is is a bit more of an upbeat one. If anyone can recommend me something that's really simple and funny, then let me know, because a lot of these books have been a bit of a downbeat ones. This was a heartbreaking sort of downbeat one, but I didn't mind too much because it was just so well done and beautifully written and everything. So yeah, I would very much recommend this. Is that all I have to say about it? I kind of want to go on and on about it, but I think you just read it because yeah, it's really, really fabulous. So there we go. Oh, my tea's gone cold probably. So there we go. There's my September done. At the moment, I'm reading Wide Sargasso Sea. So I'll probably finish that in the next couple of days. But as I say, I do need to read something a bit more light-hearted. So yes, so thank you for watching. If you've been watching, I'll probably see you next time. And yes, look at my lovely bookshelves. Aren't they nice? Take care of yourselves and each other. I will take care of myself and my other. And yes, bye-bye. The donkeys, Janet!